Welcome to another episode of This Much is True Crime, the culinary episode, shall we say, Professor Wilson?
Indeed, and it's a quick return for a conversation between the two of us because, of course, this morning in Australia, Erin Patterson was sentenced. And can you fill in our listeners about Erin Patterson and why she was being sentenced, Martin?
This is the very famous, worldwide renowned Beef Wellington murder. This is the woman who invited her in-laws over. We still don't know what the motive is. We'll come on to that, but invited them over and made them a Beef Wellington, but it included death cap mushrooms. They got very ill after that. Three of them died. One of them had to have a liver transplant and survived. And she was found guilty several weeks ago, but now she has been sentenced and she has been given 33 years in jail. Bearing in mind she's 50 years old now, it's probably likely she's going to die in jail.
Yeah, so her sentence was 33 years before she was eligible for parole. And the big debate that you and I discussed the last time we talked about the mushroom case was I said, listen out to see if she gets what we would call in this country a whole life tariff, or if she's offered up the opportunity to try for parole. And the sentencing came through today saying that she would have to do 33 years as a non-parole period, but she has been given the opportunity for parole. And this is, in fact, being quite that's actually a comparatively lenient sentence, it seems to me, given what she was convicted of having done and refused to accept what she has done. She's still maintaining her innocence, and she's certainly not expressed any remorse.
I mean, that's quite unusual, is it, in a sense? And again, I'm not being sexist here, but it's unusual for a woman to be involved in such a high-profile, several murdered case. And you would expect, again, don't mean to be sexist, but a woman would perhaps show more empathy than a man might. I mean, what's going on in her head, do you think, that she is steadfastly refusing to accept what happened, but also shows no sign of emotion, really?
Well, I think the first thing in terms of emotion is the lack of empathy. Uh, Consistently throughout this case, I think Erin Patterson has demonstrated that she cannot really walk in the shoes of others. She does not understand the severity of what it is that she has done. And I think the lack of remorse and the fact that she's still maintaining her innocence, seems to me to get to the heart of, and we'll talk about motivation, the idea of her being in control. She's somebody who, by maintaining her innocence, maintains a narrative which she thinks better fits how she conceives of herself. But I don't think you were being sexist. I think really what we're talking about here is an underlying personality, because I often say once you deal with all the instrumental reasons for why someone would commit murder, and if those instrumental reasons don't seem to fit, you're left with the psychological reasons for why people would behave in that way. And those psychological reasons get us to the core of the self, the core of the personality. And I think she just does not empathize, and she always thinks she's going to be in control.
The Australian system allows impact statements to be read out in court, and the judge takes these into account when he is deciding upon sentencing. He also will have taken into account as well, David, and I mentioned this before when we've spoken about the Erin Patterson case, the fact that she had a chance, she had the opportunity to perhaps save these people. Because when they were taken to hospital suffering from dreadful pain, and the doctors quite quickly worked out it was food poisoning, Erin Patterson arrived after they'd been admitted, saying she herself was ill. And the doctor who was treating them all said to her, you know, what was it they were eating? And is there any way these mushrooms had been foraged? And she said one word, she said Woolworths, which in Australia, certainly South Africa, is a very good supermarket. It's not the same as the Woolworths in the UK. It's a supermarket where you get great food. I once went shopping for Nelson Mandela in Woolworths in Pretoria, which kind of
Hey,
like a Waitrose with his housekeeper, with his cook. So he knew that Woolworths would never have made a mistake with death cap mushrooms on its shelf. So he knew it was true. But he was saying as well, had she told us then, there is an antidote that could have worked, he believes. He could have given it to the three who died, or including the fourth who needed a liver transplant, who could have maybe sort of taken them out of some of the agony. Whether they could have been saved or not, I don't know. But something could have been done. But the fact that she didn't do that clearly influenced the judge in his sentence.
I think that's right. I think also the two bits that you introduced there, the sense that she could have fessed up at that point about what had happened to her lunch guests in 2023. But remember, one of the things that was never discussed in front of the jury, but we were aware of before the trial, and everybody is now aware of, is that Erin Patterson had previously tried to poison her estranged husband Simon on 3 separate occasions, which had involved him having to go to hospital and having to stay in hospital. He was very poorly after one poisoning attempt. But that must have emboldened her. That must have made her feel as if she was invincible, that she had power, that she could talk her way out of it, that she wasn't going to be caught. And I think that she perfected through poisoning on those earlier occasions. I think she perfected what she would do on the lunch in July 2023 when she kills 3 of her relatives, her children's grandparents, and one of their friends, and indeed attempts to kill Ian Wilkinson. And you mention Ian Wilkinson, and you've mentioned his liver transplant and so forth. A lot of the confusion surrounding the case, it seems to me, has been people have said, "Oh, but why would she do that? Surely she shouldn't have done this because that's obvious. That's going to draw attention to her." I've kept trying to explain that she expected Ian Wilkinson to die. She she didn't imagine that there was going to be a witness to what happened during the lunch. And therefore, a lot of her strategy was undermined because Ian Wilkinson could say, no, she served us on these color of plates. She had a different plate for herself. She had a food hydrator. He could actually tell what was happening during the lunch. And that was her fatal flaw, as it were, that the object of her ire, I think, was her estranged husband, Simon. And when he didn't turn up to the lunch, she should have cancelled, but simply went through, believing, I think, that he was going to turn up.
Well, she was obviously trying to get a full house because she wanted to kill him as well, no doubt, at the lunch too. As we were saying, there were several attempts to kill him or poison him, certainly, including with rat poison in his food, that the police certainly thought she was guilty of, but they didn't charge her, or certainly wasn't taken to court. They decided to take her to court on those murders. So the jury was never told that there was previous, basically, with her trying to bump off her husband. But here's where I find there's a bit of a problem for me. Why did Simon then, knowing clearly that this is what she has in mind, and she's tried to do it to him before, why did he not stop his in-laws going to lunch?
Yeah. And
Or actually his family, her in-laws, why did he not stop his family going to lunch?
what all I can theorize, it's a hypothesis, is that he never reported the previous 3 attempts to the police. He simply went and got medical help. I think he shared his disquiet with his parents, but they effectively didn't act on what it was that he had said. But I think he knew he was the target, and I don't believe that he thought his parents were going to be harmed by her. I mean, it was a miscalculation on his part, which he presumably is having to come to terms with. But without doubt, it was him that was the object of her anger. It was him that was the focus of what it was that she was trying to do. And to this day, it will take a long time for anybody to convince me that she did not believe that he was going to turn up at that lunch, because she had a very controlling personality from what I could determine, both from the things that she said, how she behaved, and the kinds of things that she wrote. So we saw the email exchange between her and Simon about saying that she was preparing this lunch. And he said, well, I'm not coming. And he said, and she replied effectively saying, I expect you to be there. And I believe she really did expect him to turn up at any moment.
So this brings us on to the big question: why?
Yeah.
Why did she want to kill them?
Yeah. And I always say, for instrumental reasons, there are 4 L's that help you. I'm paraphrasing P.D. James, to be perfectly honest. But for instrumental reasons, there are 4 L's that are helpful. You murder because of loot, love, lust, or loathing. And if you go to the first L, loot, she wasn't murdering for money. This was a wealthy woman. She had inherited money from a number of different relatives. So she's not murdering because she believes she's going to get money in some way. Nor do I believe she was murdering for love or for lust. What she was murdering for was loathing. The fact that she was estranged from Simon, the fact that he had, and I remember saying to you in our very first podcast about this, she was annoyed that he was changing his tax status, which would reflect that he had separated from her. She did not like that. She had a very controlling personality. So I think we're dealing with loathing. And I think that when you move beyond the simple, because you might loathe somebody but never want to kill them. And therefore, once you rule out those instrumental reasons for why you might murder, you get back to the psychological reasons for murder. And those psychological reasons are about her underlying personality. And I think she was very performative, very controlling, and very expectant she would get her own way. And I think that's what happened on this occasion. And yet she made fundamental mistakes within the commission of the crime, particularly Ian Wilkinson surviving, and the whole edifice that she had constructed and concocted just fell apart.
She was known as something of a sleuth. She was part of a true crime Facebook group. Do you think, but bear in mind, of course, she's denying that she did it and she's just a rubbish cook and that was her excuse. Do you think she has trolled the internet to try and come up with the perfect crime? Obviously, she hasn't succeeded in it. Has she spent some time, do you reckon, planning this
Oh,
thoroughly?
without any shadow of a doubt. I think I used a phrase about you today to somebody else, that you were being sweetly naive about Erin Patterson. And I think there's that sweet naivety by lots of good people in the world that, no, this is somebody who's been planning this for some time. This is not a stupid woman. Erin Patterson was an accountant, an air traffic controller, worked in animal welfare. This is somebody who has a degree. This is somebody who can clearly think and plan and take charge. And she had been planning this for certainly months, if not years. And then remember, she never expected some of the lies that she told. She convinced her in-laws and their friends to come over for lunch because she wanted to ask their advice because she had cancer, and how should she tell the children? Well, she didn't have cancer, but we'd never know. That was the reason that she gave if Ian Wilkinson hadn't survived. And so it's Ian Wilkinson's survival that draws attention to these anomalies that we would think, oh, that doesn't make sense if she's been planning things. But as I say, she never expected him to survive. And therefore, all of these planning issues, these inconsistencies in what she did, would never have come to the surface.
I know that some of the relatives are annoyed at the media circus
Mhm.
around all this, possibly because when you think about it, it has all the hallmarks of cozy crime. It's almost midsummer murders, isn't it? But at the root of it all is an evil woman who inflicted, before they died, the most awful pain on
Mm.
those poor victims.
Yeah, and that's why, cozy crime, the murder itself, in the genre of cozy crime, Agatha Christie, Richard Osman, the Thursday Murder Club, the murders are really take place off page, off screen, and therefore we don't the writing, the narrative doesn't concentrate on the pain that the person would experience. And what we've got to remember is that poisoning in this way is cripplingly painful, and it's not immediate, that it's prolonged. And so that also, I think, goes to something that I did a lot of research about a Victorian English poisoner, a woman called Mary Ann Cotton, who may have murdered as many as 21 of 21 people, often family members, children, lovers, mother, husbands, and so forth. And I always was struck when Mary Ann Cotton was murdering. She would invite a neighbor in, a neighbor that she trusted, because she was pretending to care for the person who was in their bed. She was poisoning them with arsenic. And I just remember the neighbor's testimony to the court was that Mary Ann Cotton was holding the victim down, who was writhing in agony. And that got to something that I felt that we haven't really touched on in this, which is the sadism of some of these crimes. She didn't take a gun and put it to the head of her victims and fire the gun. She allowed them to ingest poison, which took some time to take effect, and it was crippling and crucifying. And I slightly worry that she rather enjoyed the pain that they must have suffered.
And she had the opportunity to put them out of suffering by fessing up and saying yes. And actually, the doctor as well said, even if she just told me it was death cap mushrooms, she didn't have to tell me she was trying to kill them or poison them. If she just told us there and then, this is what they were eating, then we could probably have saved them or done something about it. But the fact that she didn't, she hid that information from them. He actually used the phrase, and I know you don't like using the word too often, he used the phrase that Erin Patterson is the definition of evil.
I don't like that word. I do believe in evil. I think it's important to take evil out of a religious context and put it in a secular context. And I'm happy to use that word. And I'm happy to apply that word in relation to Erin Patterson, simply because of the fact that there were numerous occasions in which she could have confessed to what she had done, which would have saved a great deal of pain for her victims. And therefore, that goes back to her personality, as I was saying, and her lack of empathy, and perhaps also her sadism. We're discussing this today, though, Martin, aren't we? Because she's been sentenced. And I think she was really lucky to get the sentence that she got. It's very unusual in Australia to give a sentence of a whole life tariff, what we'd call in this country a whole life tariff. I mean, I've only come across one case of a woman called Catherine Knight who got a whole life tariff in 2000. But the case that I kept thinking about in terms of what sentence would Erin Patterson get was the case of Kathleen Folbig, who was convicted in 2003 in Australia of murdering her 4 children. And it's a notorious miscarriage of justice. Kathleen Folberg has subsequently been exonerated of those crimes and has subsequently been released from prison as a result of new evidence coming to light. But having killed 4 victims, Kathleen Folbig was sentenced again to 40 years before she was allowed to be considered for parole. So she got a 40-year sentence. It was subsequently reduced a little, but I kind of felt, oh, it's going to be in that region, over 30 years, below 40 years. Where will she get parole or not? So I think that she should count herself a bit lucky. I know that she's in a particularly notorious prison and in a notorious unit within that prison, and is not really socializing with anybody. And um, it will be particularly difficult for her, which I think the judge took into consideration when sentencing her.
Yes, because I think it's under the United Nations, or at least a very similar treaty, where no one should be kept in solitary any more than 15 days. And she's been in solitary for 15 months.
Yeah.
And clearly the judge, I mean, she's got 33 years to go before, anyone has to worry about it. But he took into account what state she would be in. And I presume this is because of her own safety.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not meant as a punishment. Solitary confinement can be used as a punishment in most Western penal systems, but
It's
this
not
is
part of the sentence.
no. This is about this is not this is simply about protecting her. And even I mentioned Kathleen Folbig. Kathleen Folbig was attacked in prison, even though she was in solitary confinement. And the prison that I believe that Patterson's in is the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, and she's in a controlled environment there. There is seemingly one prisoner that could speak to Erin Patterson, but she's chosen not to speak to them. And, it is, people won't believe this and they'll think, well, who cares? It is quite hard to live by yourself in those circumstances. It is quite, even if it isn't meant as a punishment, it is a punishing regime. And if you think about somebody like Anders Behring Breivik, he took the Norwegian penal system to the European Court of Human Rights because he said he was in isolation and how punishing that was. Tough for him. Ah,
And we should have a thought, spare thought for Ian Wilkinson, who sat through the whole trial with dignity, quietly, studiously, and at the end, thanked everyone, thanked all the authorities for what they'd done and the way they'd handled it. But also, he said that he forgave her. He's a pastor, of course,
yeah.
but he forgave her, and he just asked for everybody to be more kind in future. That's
Well,
quite something. Bearing in mind, he almost died, and he had a liver transplant to keep him alive, and he lost his wife. He says half his life is gone, but he forgave her.
Well, it's one of those strange phenomenons. If we just ignore to one side that he's a man of faith and is a pastor, the finding closure about these things is often something you and I have discussed. How do people find closure? And everybody will find closure in their own way. But forgiving somebody as opposed to maintaining that hatred of that person is one way that people can bring an end to their own psychological suffering about what's happened to them and to their loved ones. The other thing about the sentencing that, of course, we should mention, and it's more your side of the house, it is unusual in Australia to televise the sentencing, and this was televised live. What did you make of that?
I think it's right, and I think it should. I know we're starting to do a bit of it here, and I think we should do more. I think justice should be seen to be done, and this was the most high-profile case, pretty much apart from the Dingo Baby trial that Australia had many years ago. I can't think of anything else that has caught the world's attention. David, there were 7 documentary crews outside. There was a
Wow.
Netflix crew outside every day as well. So I guarantee that's going to become something. There's going to be a book written about it. Umpteen podcasts, including us, are doing it. I've rarely known a trial to garner so much interest. But I think that the judge being live, delivering the sentence was the icing on the cake for it, and absolutely deservedly so.
And I think that kind of worldwide interest in this case is because of something I've touched on before. As a species, humans have evolved by understanding what is safe to ingest and what would cause us to be poisoned. It's that ability to work out what's safe and what's not safe that has allowed us to survive over generations, which is why I think poisoning has this kind of universal interest. People are universally interested in poisonings. And, you can see it from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and the poisoned apple. You can see it from just the reaction to the FSB Russian officers going to Salisbury and poisoning the Skripals. Poisoning is inbuilt in our subconscious in a way that I don't think our great grandparents would have been so surprised by. Because, of course, going back that far in our history, until we had tests that would show that we were being poisoned, we're lucky now that toxicology has caught up so much in terms of these things. I don't think our great grandparents would have been as surprised as people in this period of time have been surprised by what has happened down under.
Well, you got it right, Erin Patterson. She's a wrong un. I got it wrong. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, although there were lots of clues that obviously I missed or interpreted in a different way. Just end with one clue that I just read today, I wasn't aware of, came out in court, was that the recipe book she made the beef Wellington from, and it's traditional, says that the beef Wellington should be one piece. It should be a long piece of beef
Yeah.
wrapped in pastry, and if you put mushrooms in it, or whatever you might do. But of course, she made individual parcels.
Yeah. And that was so it was easy to be able to identify who was going to get the poisoned death cap mushrooms, and the fact that she obviously wanted to protect herself, the fact that she was going to only give herself a small piece so that she would be able to survive what happened to her. Yeah, but for me it was the plates. And I remember asking you about the plates. And right from the start I said, listen,
I still maintain I'm true.
this woman has so much money. The fact that she's serving her guests with one color of plates and keeping a different color of plate for herself just rang so many alarm bells for me and raised so many red flags. But before we leave, I have to follow up what you've just revealed, or revealed earlier in the pod. What were you shopping for Nelson Mandela? How did you come to be doing that?
Because I was in South Africa covering many stories, and we got access to Nelson's house that he was staying in Pretoria, and his cook stroke housekeeper took us out to the local Woolworths to make his favorite meal. And the interesting thing she said about Nelson Mandela's food was she had to get the portion size right, because from all his time in Robben Island, he would just eat anything because they were so hungry. Anything that was put through the cell door, they would just gobble up. And so she found when he came out from Robben Island, he put on weight because anything that was put, he would never leave a plate of any food on it. He would finish it all because he was just so grateful. So it was all about portion size. But we went out there. Then I managed to shake hands and said hello to the great man himself. What I didn't realize was that he's deaf in one ear. And so as I was shaking hands, talking to him, I think it was his deaf ear. And bless him, he was saying, yes, nice to meet you too. I think just because he says that to everybody, but I don't think he heard a word I was saying. But I managed to shake the great man's hand
That
and
is
went shopping for his lunch. And guess what? I can't remember if it was mushrooms, but if it was mushrooms, they would be perfectly beautiful, non-dangerous mushrooms. Just one thing before we finish.
Yeah,
And we're talking about she thought she was going to kill them all.
yeah.
If she'd managed to kill Ian Wilkinson, if he hadn't survived, would she have got away with it?
Yeah, because we'd never have known that she served on separate plates. We'd never have known that she did have a food dehydrator. We'd never have known that. Yeah, it would have gone on and on and on. all the clues that were clues that eventually were going to convince a jury beyond reasonable doubt, that narrative wouldn't have been complete, and there would have been enough enough preparedness to say she's just a bad cook. And so, thank heavens, in all kinds of reasons, that Ian Wilkinson survived.
Quite an astonishing trial. And now sentencing, and she has the right to appeal. I doubt very much that's going to be successful, is it?
I think she's run out of money, Martin.
Yeah.
I think it's a question now of she just can't. She would have to be given a public a prosecutor to be able to appeal, and also she would have to. An appeal would have to be based on there being some flaw in the judge's summing up that prejudiced the jury against her. And from everything that I've read now, I became obsessed by the case as much as you did. I didn't hear anything that was prejudicial to her. In fact, I felt the judge bent over backwards to make sure that the jury weren't prejudiced against her. So I don't think she'll be able. She has 28 days to appeal, but I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't.
Yeah, and the judge, to give him his credit, he spent 2 whole days with the jury, just going over the defense arguments. So there's no way he rushed things. I think he was as fair as he possibly could be with this. So I doubt very much. And I think there'll be an outcry if she gets legal aid in Australia to go for this. So I think that's the end of Erin Patterson until, of course, the Netflix show comes out. And I'm sure that's probably planned for next year sometime. David, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. Until the
Martin,
next
lovely
time.
talking to you again. Take
Bye
care.
now.